Hey guys, welcome back to week 3 of the White Buffalo story. This has been such a blast, just reflecting on what God's done in our life and our marriage in preparation for sharing that with you guys. It's been so cool hearing from you that this is resonating with you, that, you know, I know some of you are in a similar debt situation to what we've been in, and this is giving you hope that God is moving and working in His own way in your life. And that's just such a blessing to hear. I think stories and sharing stories is so important. And we've been so encouraged in our walk and journey by other people's stories. So the fact that anybody could be encouraged by ours is just a blessing. And we're so grateful for that. So last week we left off with us being dropped off at this downtown cottage by my parents and our community group who helped us move. And us sitting there in that makeshift living room realizing that while we had a long way to go, the first piece of our journey to pay off debt had worked. We had sold that house, put a chunk to debt. God had provided this house through crazy circumstances, as I talked about in the last video, and there we were, ready to go. So we rented that house back for 2 months while we waited for it to close. So we just sat in that little rental, making all our plans, dreaming big, and waiting to have ownership of that house so we could get started. And I can still remember the day we signed the papers, we came home and Chris took a sledgehammer and knocked out a wall. I mean, we were ready to go. We were so excited about that. And so that renovation journey on the downtown cottage, which is just up the street, the hill a little bit from the Buffalo Bungalow where we live now, that renovation took about 5 months. And as you can tell from what I've said, we lived in it through that period. And so that provided a lot of challenges for us. It was a rough season, but it also was really good and formative for us as well. This was a major renovation. You know, the last house, we redid some bathrooms and some paint. So we redid a bathroom and we had another to use, right? That, you know, not easy, but doable. This one was a whole other different story. We were adding a master suite on the back. We moved the kitchen to this garage where we had to raise the floor. We redid the entire existing house. I mean, it was just a whole other scale of project than we had ever tackled. And living in that while we did that was crazy. We didn't have a kitchen for 4 or 5 months. We didn't have heating and air for that same period of time. Thankfully, it was spring, and so God literally timed it perfect that we were okay. We had heaters at the beginning, little space heaters, and by the time we really needed air, we were getting it. And so that was great. We had fans and we made it work. But it was a journey, y'all. It really was. And I can remember Chris and I both just praying that, like, Gracie would survive. Like, she would come trotting from the back of the house with roof tacks in her mouth. She'd be over in the corner eating piles of sheetrock debris that we just thought we had got it all. I mean, it was a mess. But we all survived and we finished that house. And it was exciting for several reasons, because we had discovered this love for renovation design in that first house, as I've shared with you guys, which was really cool. So that season in the downtown cottage where we were renovating for those 5 months was significant for us for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was rough. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Living in that scale of renovation was crazy. For us, financially, that was the best option. Renting was not an option, and that really made the most sense, even though it was so difficult. But out of that came some really cool things for our marriage. While we had some tough days, I'm not gonna lie, we discovered a lot about ourselves through that process. You know, they say there's 2 types of personalities in people. There are task-oriented people and relational people. Y'all, I am very relational. I want quality time spent together. And so when we would have hard days and we're living in all of this craziness, my gut reaction is, let's just hang out and connect and you know, talk it through. And Chris is task oriented, so his reaction is, I'm going to work until this is done because I can't stand to look at it. So we really had to figure out how to meet in the middle on that, and how to let those 2 differences combine into a strength for us. And our marriage really, even though we struggled some on days, you know, during that season, we came out stronger because of it. And that was really cool to see that we learned lessons then that we're putting into practice now that have made a huge difference for us. that season was also really awesome for us because while we had fallen in love with renovation and design in the last house, all we had done were a couple of bathrooms, things small scale, and that had given us a taste of that and had kind of given us dreams for the future about what that could look like. But until we really tackled something on that scale, we didn't really know, are we good at this? Do we enjoy it? Is it good for our family? And so doing a renovation of that scale was really cool because we realized how much we do love it, how it does bring us together, and how this is something that we want to be a part of our lives, which is good with this adventure that God was bringing our way. So as I said in the last video, we knew when we bought that house, it was not going to be a forever house. Even though we loved it, the more that we understood about the vision He was bringing us, the more we realized that that was going to be a great investment that we could not just sit on. So I do want to say that we kind of went into that house knowing it was a 2-ish year house, depending on where life took us, so that we could sell it, pay down more debt, and do the whole thing again. So thankfully, we've learned to thrive on that and be excited by that. So after those first 5 months, the house was renovated. We kind of just settled into life, and it was a really great season for us. It was really fun having it all done ahead of time up front, where we didn't have that in the last house. There weren't as many lingering projects, which was really good for us to have that downtime for our family. Around the time we moved into that house was when I really started processing that God had really given me the blog and introduced me to the blog world for a purpose, and I started to really look at what that might be. So for me at that point, I had blogged for a couple of years and documented our last house renovation. I was making no income from it. It was a personal blog. It was not a professional blog by any stretch of the imagination, but I saw that people were doing that. I saw that people were making an income from that, and I realized, hey, I love this so much that I've done it for free for 2 years. What if this is a way that fits with our whole renovation journey that God is going to provide for our family? And so I just started researching. I dove into about 6 months of branding research, blogging research, business research, just kind of really researched the whole industry, learned everything I could. And by the end of that 6 months, in September of 2012, I officially launched the White Buffalo Styling Co. as y'all know it today, though it has seen some changes over the years. But that was such an exciting time because we really started seeing God move in huge ways. I mean, we already had, but like I said in that first video, you know, we were in that first house drowning in debt with these visions we felt like God gave us of what life could be and no pathway to get there. And when I started the blog and really started to see it gain traction, we started to realize like God is paving the way for these things. You know, He doesn't call us to something and not provide a way to get there. We have to be willing and work hard, but He's providing a way. And so that was really affirming for us to see. So in that second year, or I guess that second half of the first year and into the second year at the Downtown Cottage, I just dove headfirst into the blog. I was teaching at that point, which I loved. I loved my students, but I also knew that we wanted me to be home with our kids. And while we didn't have a baby yet, teaching wasn't going to be forever for me. And so I really had a deadline. That put a timeline on the blog that, hey, I need this to make a certain amount of income by a certain point, or this whole vision we have for our family is not going to happen. And I think that motivation was huge for me to really dive in. So fast forward, the blog has been up for a year. It's fall of 2013. I'm in my 3rd year of teaching, and we were starting to talk about babies, knew that they were kind of on the horizon for us, if you will. And I started to process that I was kind of drowning. My life had become really unbalanced because I was working so hard on the blog to try to make it work for our kids, our future kids, and our future family. And I was teaching full time, and the blog was demanding more and more and more energy. And so we had a lot of come to Jesus meetings that fall where Chris was like, okay, something with this has to give and has to shift. We can't keep going the way that we are. So we decided by Christmas of that year, which was a hard decision, that would be my last year teaching, that as of June, at the end of the year, I would go full time White Buffalo Styling Co. And it was such an exciting decision. I need to say right here, because I've gotten a lot of questions about this. The decision was not an easy one. It wasn't that the blog was making more money or even as much money as teaching, and so it was a clear choice to leave it. It wasn't making near what I was making teaching. It wasn't making a quarter at that point of what I was making teaching. But we saw the potential there. We found out just after that we were pregnant for the first time. We ended up losing that baby in February of that year, and I did a post about that. I'm going to link to it in this post because that was such a formative time for us, but that's something that so many people go through, and so many people's stories about their miscarriages really helped us to heal. And so if that's something that you're struggling with, I want you to have our story, you know, how God worked through that for us. But that was a really formative thing for us, because while we had definitely encountered some hard things with debt, with all that, that was the first thing we had encountered that we couldn't fix, or that we couldn't choose to remove ourselves from, that we had to literally just say, we cannot do anything about this. And, you know, is God who He says He is? Like, do we believe that God is still good in the midst of this loss? It was so faith affirming for us to realize that yes, like, we believe that He is. And that really, I think, was a big time of growth for our family. We moved forward even though there was not a tangible baby on the horizon. We knew and hoped and had faith that one would come, and that was still the right decision for me to stop teaching and move to the blog. So I told my principal, I told my students, and we really moved in that direction. And my last week of teaching, we got a positive pregnancy test that was our Rosie. And so it was just really cool timing for God to say, you stepped out in faith on this, but it's the right decision for your family. And so we, as of June, I came home. This was June 2014. I came home and dove headfirst into the blog. I had 6 months before Rosie was going to be there. I guess 7 or 8 months. I don't know. I had some time before Rosie was going to be there. And so my goal during that time was to build the blog to the absolute best and biggest that it could be, dream-wise, but also income-wise for our family. The blog did start to make more and more income, I will say, because a lot of people have asked me this, like, oh, like, please tell me how you did it. Give me the formula, because if my blog could surpass my teaching salary, I would come home, or things like that. And I have to say that the blog has never surpassed my teaching salary. And for us, that wasn't really the goal. The goal was to make enough for us to get by with the blog, with doing something that I love that also supports this renovation vision that's a part of our life, that lets our family have the vision we feel like God intended for me to be home with our kids. And so I'm so grateful for this job. It's my dream job, and how I've made income and how it's been successful has looked different at different times. That first year I did a lot of sponsored posts. I had a lot of kind of freelance work that I was doing that paid well, so it did start making a lot more. But during that whole time, I will say things were so tight. Like, we were so affirmed that that was the right decision, but it was never easy. Every month was difficult. And I think knowing that we were going to sell that house and pay off another big chunk of debt was a lot of the peace that we had in taking a step like that, that we knew that some of that financial relief would be coming. We were thinking spring of 2015. Rosie obviously was on her way due the end of January 2015, and so we had no clue what any of that would look like. But as we got closer and closer to Rosie coming, the blog did do better and better, but things were tighter and tighter, and we also realized our expenses are about to increase with her. And while things are tight right now, we still have that long-term vision of paying down debt. So selling that house was always a plan. We didn't know how it would look with a child. We didn't know how renovating another one would look like with a child. All that was very unknown. But we just felt God affirmed over and over and over again that that was the right vision and direction for our family. And so we continued to move toward that. At this point in our journey, I will say that selling that house was still a mode of survival, if you will. While selling that first house did give us a little bit of relief month to month, it wasn't nearly enough to overcome my pay cut by choosing to come home and blog, and adding Rosie and the expenses that she would bring. And so for us, we're still in that mode of survival, and that we have to do this to survive. Yes, it's going to help us immensely to pay down that debt, but you know, we still have to survive month to month. But we felt confident that God would provide a way for that. He just continually provided little assurances and little steps along the way that told us it was the right decision and the right move for our family. And you know, He had us in the palm of His hand. He wasn't going to leave us or forsake us, and that we could trust that. So I'm going to leave off there for video 3. Renovating the downtown cottage, living there, starting the blog, coming home to blog full time. I'll pick up next video with having Rosie, and then what the transition from that house to the Buffalo Bungalow looked like. So thank you guys so much for following along. I hope that you're gleaning something from this and sharing our story, and I'll be back next week with part 4.